Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and every community has its superstars. People who, by dint of intellect, creativity, the power of their commitment and accomplishment, and the quality of their soul, make an unusual, extraordinary contribution and impact the life of the community for good. And on this edition of L'Chaim, I have the extraordinary honor to be sitting with a true Jewish superstar, one of world Jewry's preeminent historical scholars and authors, perhaps most well known as Israel's immediate past ambassador to the United States, a post he held from 2009 to 2013, and a person who continues to make an enormous contribution, enormous service to the State of Israel and to world Jewry. Ambassador Michael Oren, currently a member of the Kulanu party in the Israeli Knesset, and one who also holds a chair of international diplomacy at Herzliya's Lauder School of Government Diplomacy and Strategy. And Michael Oren is the author of the most talked about book in the Jewish world this year, entitled Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide, published by Random House. And Michael Oren, I have been an enormous fan of yours. It seems like forever. And you have written an extraordinarily well-written, beautiful, incisive, courageous book, which has also stirred some controversy. And it is just wonderful to have you sitting at this table to join us on L'Chaim and JBS. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm blushing. I don't know where to respond to all that. Thank you. It's my pleasure and my delight to be with you.
It
Thank
is
you.
so sweet of you. Very often, Michael, when somebody sits in that chair, I like to talk about who they are and where they come from. And your background is extraordinary. It's fascinating. And I hope this is only the first time you sit here. There is so much to talk about in this book, which is a collection, by the way, of personal. The word anecdote is not fair. There's nothing anecdotal here, but the viewers should understand this is a must read for every American and American Jew. This must be a part of every American household's library. But what you take us on is like a whirlwind journey. It starts before you become ambassador. It sort of gives us some sense of who you are and what you are and how you grew up in New Jersey and the fight you had to become who you are, overcoming dyslexia and becoming a scholar after really academic issues, how you become an athlete and you become a committed Zionist, and how you're influenced by meeting Yitzhak Rabin as a kid, 15-year-old kid, and how it sets you on a path that ultimately brings you to make Aliyah. You serve as a paratrooper in the IDF. You're in the Lebanon War. You talk about how it transformed who you are. And then one day, it doesn't happen so one day, but after all you do as an historian, as an author, as a thinker, as someone who is involved in the edges of diplomacy, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, decides he's going to tap you to become Israel's ambassador to Washington. And here you met Yitzhak Rabin when he was in Washington. You're going to have the same office that your hero had. And
Same house.
Same house. You even write about, by the way, you write that you don't agree with Prime Minister Netanyahu on every issue. And you and your wife have to discuss, is this something you want to do? And then you do it. And for 2009, 2014, Michael, you make an extraordinary contribution to world Jewry as Israel's ambassador to Washington. And again, on a different hour, I just want to explore the many ways in which life took turns for you. You did your bar mitzvah from transliteration.
I did.
And now you're fluent in Hebrew.
Now I work in Hebrew.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
Only one anecdote, one
Yes.
little piece as I'm reading the book. I want to know whether this is true, because does it bind us together in some ethereal way? You and I both went to Columbia. But what I didn't know, were you at WKCR?
Yes, I was the news director at WKCR.
Okay, and I was the general manager of WKCR 10 years before you were there. So you're KCR in the 73 Yom Kippur War?
No, after.
After.
Yes.
Okay, but you're doing exciting things at WKCR.
I covered Arafat's speech at the
Right,
UN.
right, that's what it was.
That I covered. I covered a number of things. Zionism equals racism.
And you're the news
Chaim
director.
Herzog,
It's unbelievable.
ripping up the.
Well, we share KCR together.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about the issues you raise in the book,
Yeah.
and I want to begin by simply asking you to position yourself, and it's important for our viewers to understand. Who are you, especially in terms of the political spectrum? And again, you wrote that you disagreed with Mr. Netanyahu on the peace process. You were upset with his criticism of Rabin before Rabin was assassinated.
Indeed.
How do you position yourself, left, right, center, in terms of the Israeli political scene? And then we'll go from there.
Okay, I'm a centrist. I've always been a centrist. But I'm an interesting sort of variety of centrist, put it that way. If I were in the United States, I would describe myself as a political dinosaur, sort of a Jackson Democrat. And that's not an Andrew Jackson Democrat, it's a Scoop Jackson Democrat. And someone who is, I would say, center-right on security and on diplomacy, but center-left on social issues.
Yes.
Okay? And that did not exist in Israel for a long time. A long time ago, there was a party called Achdut Avodah. You may remember it. Yigal Allon was a member of Achdut Avodah. I was walking through the Knesset the other day with one of my parliamentary assistants who's like 25 years old. And there's a picture of Rabin on the wall, and he's sitting there talking to Yigal Allon. And my parliamentary assistant says, "Who's that sitting there talking to Yitzhak Rabin?" Nobody remembers Yigal Allon. Nobody remembers Tebenkin. Nobody remembers Hird.
The Alon Plan?
The Alon Plan. He was a member of Achdut Avodah. Achdut Avodah was exactly that. These are people who came out of the kibbutz movement. They concluded that Israel had to guard itself very vigilantly on issues related to peace, on giving up territory, to whom do you give up territory, under what conditions. On social issues, they remained very liberal. So I looked, when I decided to go into Israeli politics, which, by the way, was not a cavalier decision, it was a weighty decision, I looked for a party that most approximated that division of center-right on diplomacy, security, center-left on social and economic issues. And the closest match I found was the Kulanu Party, which is I'm a member of now, and I serve as a representative of Kulanu in Knesset. And there was the additional benefit that everybody else on my list, on the party list, are people who come from the world of economics, of social policy, the fight against poverty. I'm the only one who comes from the world of diplomacy, whereas in most other parties in the Knesset, just about everybody deals with diplomacy. Everyone's got a position on the peace process. Everyone's got a position in Iran. Since I was the only one dealing with this in my party, I got to actually design the platform. So now that we were a member of the coalition, I would say we are the most liberal member of this coalition on issues relating to the peace process. And fortunately, those ideas conform with my, because frankly, I drew them up. So, so there you have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you write that you disagree with Mr. Netanyahu on the peace process, this is when you're considering whether you'll accept the position as Israeli ambassador to Washington.
Yes.
What did you mean? What is his, and is it still true? What was Netanyahu's position on the peace process in 2009, which you disagreed with, and has, you take us through take us through every single dramatic moment, and it's interesting. I'd forgotten so many of the issues
Oh my God.
that existed from 2009 to 2013, but one of the things you write movingly about is what did it mean for a Likud prime minister to go to Bar Ilan, and at Bar Ilan, in front of the knitted yarmulkes that you write about, say that he was now for the two-state solution? I want to know what did it mean when in 2009 you didn't agree with him, and has he changed? Have you changed? Are you more aligned, or do you still have serious problems with the prime minister's position?
Okay, so in 2009, before the Bar Ilan speech, we're
Yes.
talking about February
Yeah, that's right.
2009, Netanyahu still opposed the two-state solution. He was unwilling to consider any limitation on settlement building. And from my perspective, that was a problem. I thought Israel should subscribe to the two-state solution. Even with the awareness, and a very deep awareness on my part, that the two-state solution was going to be very elusive, and not because of Israel, but because of the Palestinians. The Palestinians lacked the type of social cohesiveness, and this is tradition. This is historically. Didn't start in 2009. It started in the 1930s. The British offered the first two-state solution in 1937,
That's
and again
right.
in 1940. They turned it down. The Palestinians turned it down. Being an historian was very important here, having that perspective. But I thought it was important for our relationships with the United States, certainly with the new Obama administration, the Bush administration. People forget, talk about short memories, people forget that George Bush was the first American president to come out in favor of creating a Palestinian state. President Clinton never said that. George Bush said that. And so the position of Netanyahu circa February 2009 put us at variance both with the Democrats and the Republicans, and that was not a comfortable situation. On settlements, similarly, Bush had recognized in his letter to Ariel Sharon in 2005 that Israel could build within the major settlement blocks. Those are the 3 or 4 blocks in the West Bank that incorporate about 85% of the settlers.
And you don't doubt this letter exists?
Oh, I know the letter exists. I know the people who drafted the letter.
Does the Obama administration?
Obama administration later denied the validity and essentially the existence of the letter.
And you're prime minister, you're ambassador at that point,
Yes.
when they're denying it,
Yes,
and you know it's real.
indeed.
Okay, go ahead.
But let's get back
Yes.
to that. That has ramifications that go beyond even the U.S.-Israel
Yes.
relationship, because you had a problem of a sitting president denying the validity of a commitment by a previous president. And for Israel's perspective, much of our security relies on presidential commitments. So it was a problematic precedent for American diplomacy. But leaving that aside, you asked me about my relationship
Yes.
with Netanyahu. So when he gave the Bar Ilan speech, which was in June 2009, when he agreed to the moratorium, the settlement freeze, which was in September of 2009, well, it went into effect in November, actually went into effect on Thanksgiving Eve of 2009, that put Israeli policy much more in line with mainstream American politics, the bipartisan part of American politics, which supported settlement building within those areas that would be part of Israel in the event of any two-state solution, and supporting a two-state solution.
Okay, and did that put him more in line with your own thinking?
Yes, it
Okay.
did.
By the way, it did not prevent you from taking the job before the Bar Ilan speech, correct?
But there were reasons why. One of the reasons was I knew that traditionally, again, being an historian, you know that it's an old adage. The left in Israel makes war and the right makes peace. Menachem Begin, all right, Golda Meir. And I knew that Benjamin Netanyahu was the only leader in Israel who had the authority, the legitimacy, and the credibility, to say nothing of the political clout, to make peace, should peace ever be an option, or even engage in a peace process. Let's not exaggerate the easiness with which we could achieve peace, the ease with which we could achieve peace. So that I agreed with. And then over, far and above the Palestinian issue, was the Iranian issue. And here I had absolutely no disagreement with him, and I believe that he understood the nature and magnitude of the Iranian nuclear threat far better than any other Israeli
All right,
leader.
we're going to come back to that. I also want you to touch on Rabin for one moment, because again, it's well known how important Rabin was in forming your own Jewish identity, your commitment to Israel. And yet you cite in your book, it's one of the things you write, that one of the things that upset you was Netanyahu's attitude towards Rabin before Rabin was assassinated. What was that?
Well, he was very vocal in his opposition to the Oslo Accords and to attacking Yitzhak Rabin. Of course, no one had any inkling that Rabin might be assassinated. I had no inkling. I was working with him. I talk about coming home and telling my family that the atmosphere in the street is very violent. I'm afraid someone could actually get assassinated. I thought about Shimon Peres, who was the foreign minister at the time, Yossi Beilin, one of the leaders of the peace camp. It never once occurred to me that somebody would fire a gun at Yitzhak Rabin.
Because?
Because Rabin was above it all. Rabin was a national icon. And no one could accuse him of being a bleeding heart peacenik. This is the man who had led Israel to its greatest military victory. This is the person who had led convoys through the corridor of Jerusalem to relieve 100,000 Jews who were denied food and water in Jerusalem during the War of Independence. This is Yitzhak Rabin. And it never occurred to me. And
you remember the day it happened?
Well, someone asked me just this morning, at what point did I turn gray in my life? And there was a 3-month period in which, in August of 1995, my sister-in-law was killed in a bus bombing in Jerusalem. I described this in the book. Joni, who was a Jewish day school teacher from New Haven. And then Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. And I had worked all night the night before, and I was trying to take a nap, and all of a sudden I heard screaming in the house. And that's when I heard about it. And the next night, we filed past Rabin's casket that was lying, not in state outside the Knesset, but there was this almost infinite line of mourners, and I took my 10-year-old son's hands, and we waited for hours there with candles, and the entire hillsides of Jerusalem were lit up with candles, and there were circles of people, religious and secular, together, sitting around these candles and just weeping and begging forgiveness. Honestly, I can close my eyes and see it, and I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to permit myself a digression for one moment. There are many people who are worried that there is a different ethic being just at its edges, but that it's a different ethic in the state of Israel, where the extreme right believes it's entitled to do some terrible things to Arabs and Palestinians. And there are people who say to me all the time, look, you see, Israel is no different than the Palestinians because now we have Jewish terrorists who would, burn a kid alive. And you said that, you went home and you said to your wife, just before Rabin was assassinated, there's a feeling here that is bothering me, that worries me about the tone of Israel. You're there, you're intimately involved now, Michael. Does it worry you now that there is a different climate in the state of Israel that should concern me as a caring American Jew about the feel and texture of Israeli life?
And I want to say, and without being diplomatic here, I want to say yes and no. Okay. The yes part of it is yes, there are these crazy fanatics who have resorted to violence against Palestinians, perhaps not only Palestinians, and has resulted in fatalities. And they have been radicalized. They've continued to be radicalized. By the way, they consider themselves post-Zionists. They don't recognize the validity of Israel. They talk about the Zionist enemies. The Jews who talk about the Zionist enemies. And it's a source of concern. It's a huge source of concern. The president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, who, by the way, was a person quite on the right side of the political spectrum, came out and condemned this in unequivocal terms and received death threats. Our own party went to visit him in a show of support for him. So there is this faction, this component in Israel society. But the no part of it is to see it in context. And the context was then, too, in 1995. There were people across the political spectrum who were more than horrified by Rabin's assassination. No one in that part of the spectrum came out and supported it. On the contrary, everyone was deeply, deeply remorseful. And here again, when we have attacks by this radical fringe against Palestinians, it is condemned across the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. Nobody comes out. I'm talking about the most right-wing members of Knesset. Nobody comes out and says, we're going to support this. Mm-hmm. Now, this is immeasurably different than what happens on the Palestinian side. Here you have a Palestinian leadership under Mahmoud Abbas that names town squares after Palestinian terrorists who killed dozens of Israeli children or women or civilians. It doesn't matter. They extol them. It's a whole culture of praising the people they call martyrs, but who were in fact mass murderers. And it's part of that, of the essential problem in the peace process. Because the problem of the peace process, and I'll tell you as someone who's been actually in the negotiations, who studied the negotiations, it's not about settlements. Settlements are difficult. It's complex. It's not even about Jerusalem, which is very complex. It's about whether there is in the Palestinian universe room for a legitimate, permanent, peaceful Jewish state, which is not an interloper state, which is a state that is authentic and rooted in our homeland. It's that simple.
And is there in the Palestinian universe room for a peaceful Jewish state in the Middle East?
That is legitimate.
Legitimate.
I'll tell you why the word is legitimate.
Yes, please.
I talk about this at some extent in the book. When the Arab narrative, the classic Arab narrative, you can find it, it's interesting, in the protocol of the discussion between FDR, President Roosevelt, and in Ibn Saud, who was the founder of the Saudi dynasty, in February 1945. And they meet on a destroyer in the Suez Canal, and Franklin Roosevelt says to Ibn Saud, why don't you accept these Zionists? Accept the Jews, let them come home. And Ibn Saud says to Franklin Roosevelt, he says, are you kidding? A bunch of European Christians killed a bunch of European Jews. And the survivors they want to dump in the Islamic heartland. Why should that be our responsibility? So anybody who connects the existence of the State of Israel to the Holocaust is basically embracing the Arab narrative. Now, if I'm an Arab, why should I accept as legitimate a country which has no authenticity, that has no deep roots in this area? It's a passing phenomenon, and one that the Europeans, the West, have imposed on us. The only way for there to be true peace is for the Palestinians to reciprocate what we have done toward the Palestinians, which is to recognize them as a people, to say that they have an unassailable right to self-determination in the land they regard as their homeland. We need the Palestinians to say the same thing about us. Because without that, there'll never be a legitimate peace. It'll always be irredenta. Even if we create a two-state situation, it'll always be irredenta. To this day, Mark, I have not heard one Palestinian leader, not one Palestinian leader, talk about two states for two peoples. They'll talk about a two-state solution, but they will never say the words two states for two peoples because they do not believe that the Jews are a people. And if you're not a people, you don't have a right to self-determination in your homeland. I've never heard a Palestinian leader say that there was a temple on the Temple Mount. I never heard a Palestinian leader say, gee, these coins that we dig up and these seals that we dig up that have ancient Hebrew on them say something about the Jewish connectors. Oh, that was a different people. The Jews of today are not those people. They're descended from Khazars or something. All right? You'll use that. No one is willing to make that leap. Mm-hmm. And if you ask me, that was the problem. Listen, we've had an Arab-Israeli or an Israeli-Palestinian problem for over a century, well before the first settlement was ever built. So what was the reason why the Palestinians rejected the two-state solution in 1937 or in 1947? When there were no settlements back, there was not even a state yet, and they rejected it. Because of this notion that they cannot accept the validity, the legitimacy of a rooted Jewish homeland.
Okay. Have you ever met a Palestinian, for lack of a better term, civilian who's willing to live with the State of Israel as you define it?
Yes.
Have you ever met a Palestinian leader who has said to you in private what you would like him to say in public?
No.
Right.
Okay. No, I had to think.
Okay.
I had to think. They've said certain things in private that they wouldn't say in public, not specifically that.
And that's why I asked you that question.
Because if they say it in public, that may be their last public pronouncement.
Yes, and ultimately they must say it in public, or it will never happen. So if you had said to me, yes, somebody said it to me in private, I then would have said to you, then why won't I say it in public? But you've already addressed that. And my point is, it's so evident self-evident, what you've just said. You articulate it extremely well, but it is evident to anybody who looks at the situation that, as you said a moment ago, settlements or no settlements, and they're problematic, but they're not what this is all about. And it's not about Jerusalem, and it is about, in some way, the right of return of Palestinians, because the Palestinians are arguing for the right of Palestinian return because ultimately they don't want there to be a Jewish majority or a Jewish state. But if it's so obvious, Michael, and now we come to President Obama,
Right.
who in the American administration doesn't get it? In other words, I would imagine that some of the problems that the Jewish community perceives having with the Obama administration is that there doesn't seem to be, either with President Obama personally or the people who surround him, and no one understands. You have a much better sense. We don't understand how it really works behind closed doors, and you try to give us some sense of it. And I don't know the extent to which you can tell us everything. And I always say that to people who sit at this table, I don't assume you can tell me what you can't tell me. I want you to tell me what you can tell me.
Right.
Okay. But we worry that in the administration, there isn't the very understanding that you just articulated. And I want to ask the question with one more wrinkle. It brings me now to your book and some of the criticism you've taken for the book. You write about the Cairo speech.
Yes.
And what you say is, in the Cairo speech, there are many problems for you in the Cairo speech that President Obama gave when he first became president. He does link Israel to the Holocaust. And you make that point very clearly. And it was very upsetting to any Jew who understood that as important as the Holocaust is in the creation of the State of Israel, it does not give reason for Israel, and that Israel transcends the Holocaust. And then later on he uses the line in his second visit to Jerusalem from your friend, Yossi Klein Halevi, about the relationship of the Holocaust to Israel, and that ultimately Israel transcends the Holocaust. But I want you now to come to President Obama.
Yes.
I want to know how you feel, to what extent he does or does not understand the reality that you just described. And when you deal with the fact that he did the Cairo speech, and what he did was use what you call the Palestinian narrative. He used the Palestinian narrative to justify Israel. What's it say about the Obama administration and its relationship to Israel?
Well, there are many ways of answering this,
Yes.
Mark. Where to begin? I mean, I explored, I viewed it as a fundamental part of my duty was to figure out the man with whom I'm dealing. Because in 2009, the president was not particularly well known. He had only been in the Senate for a few years. He had run a very good campaign, but he wasn't well known. He wasn't well known to the American public, needless to say, no, not to the Israeli public. So I set out to use the tools I had acquired as a historian over 3 decades to explore him. And this becomes the most controversial part of this book, what I call a section called Obama 101. And I do what an historian does. I look at all of his speeches, I look at all of his statements, all of his interviews, but most important, his memoirs. And his earlier memoir, Dreams from My Father, which was written before he was intending to run for president, it tells you, it's really a window into his soul. And I make a number of conclusions, among them his personal background, and he talks extensively in this book and in his first speeches about his experiences in the Muslim world and his connections to the Muslim world. He sees himself as a natural bridge, but also his university background. He studied at Columbia. He studied at Harvard, taught at Chicago, and I had spent a lot of time visiting various universities, teaching at universities. I was on sabbatical in 2008, and I knew the ideas that were the dominant ideas on American campuses. Israel as sort of colonialist project, Palestinians as victims, Palestinians as a people that are perfectly capable of sustaining a state structure if given the opportunity, if Israel colonialism would end. That's simple. And not having a deep historical understanding of the region. One line that I quote that I remarked on in one of the president's early interviews in the media, this is again in 2009, he says, I want to return American Middle Eastern relations to what they were 20 and 30 years ago. And I recall that 20 years ago, the United States was bombing Libya. 30 years ago was the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. Where exactly does he want to return them to? People have very, very short memories. They don't remember. And even in the contemporary area, in the contemporary situation, where you have this Arab state system created by the Europeans after World War I to serve European interests, a situation where the French said, okay, tomorrow you're a Syrian, tomorrow you're a Lebanese, and the British said, tomorrow you're an Iraqi, all right? Who knows what these things are, all right? And then when they wanted to leave the area, they turned over these states to families or clans who said to people, if you're not going to be an Iraqi, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill your family. That's how these states were held together. The Palestinians weren't created any differently. The British came along and said, there's a place called Palestine. And here are the borders of Palestine. And everyone in that borders are Palestinian. And it's interesting that before May 14th, 1948, the day of Israel's creation, Palestinians referred to Jews, not to Palestinians. The Palestinians were Arabs. The 1947 partition resolution refers to the creation of a Jewish state and an Arab state, not a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. The pavilion for Palestine at the 1939 World's Fair in New York, the pavilion, the Palestinian pavilion where you could get genuine Palestinian cuisine, all right, was the Zionist pavilion. So Palestinian meant Jew. And to understand that the problem of Iraq today, that the problem of Syria, of social cohesion, of taking a peoples who don't necessarily organize themselves along nation-state line, which is a Western model. And I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm making an historic observation. And to try to impose it on the Palestinians who keep on failing to achieve that goal because they're offered, not as if they haven't been offered Palestinians, they've been offered a Palestinian state. They've been offered a state more frequently probably than any other country in history and have turned it down more frequently, usually with violence, is telling you something. And to ignore the precedents is to not foresee what's going to happen in the future. And what I found in Washington, and not just among the presidents, it's widespread throughout what's known as the Beltway, a lack of deep historic understanding about this, or even a willingness to even consider the historic record. There's a solution out there, a two-state solution. I hear it again and again. I've heard it from some of the presidential candidates even now. There is no alternative to the two-state solution. Well, guess what? There is. There are all sorts of alternatives. None of them are perfect. None of them are perfect. Some of them can lay a groundwork for a two-state solution.
For example?
Well, I think we should be helping the Palestinians to create national institutions. You know, there are two models for state-making in the Middle East. One is the European model that I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. You come along, you draw a border, right, and you say, okay, you're a state. The other model is we build national institutions. We build health care. We build education. We build infrastructure. We build a military. We build a democracy. And then we declare statehood. And we put our state on stable foundations. That model is the state of Israel. Now, a couple years back, there was a Palestinian prime minister named Salam Fayyad, whom I'm proud to call friend. And he understood that. He knew that the Palestinians had to emulate the Israeli model. And in our secret moments, I would say, you are truly a Palestinian Zionist. He didn't appreciate that. but he was. He understood that this was the model for statement. He tried to build transparent, non-corrupted or uncorrupted Palestinian institutions.
Would he have accepted?
And he was thrown out of office by Mahmoud Abbas.
Would he have accepted your definition that there should be a legitimate Jewish state alongside a Palestinian state?
He would say to me, don't ask me that yet. He would
how
say,
I'm
not. Don't ask me to define.
But how did you read that?
I read it as let's leave that for a later stage in the negotiation.
But did you say to yourself, I hope he can get there?
I don't want to get. Again, I keep it. You said I want anything I can tell you.
That's
There's
correct.
a difference between what I can tell you and also what I will tell you.
Fair enough.
Okay. And I have a number of Palestinian friends, and I prefer to keep our conversations confidential for them because they run risks that I don't.
I understand.
Worst comes to things that happen to me, I can get thrown out of office. They can get thrown out of life.
I understand.
And it's a much higher level of risk.
Okay, continue with Obama again.
Right.
And I want you to tell me again, there are many American Jews who are very concerned about Obama. You write you do not believe he's anti-Israel. You write that in your book.
Yes.
I think you also do not believe he's anti-Semitic.
Not in any way.
Okay. But you do feel his attitude has been shaped by a certain worldview, which you write is antithetical to Israel's worldview, and that the Cairo speech, although now I am making the inference, is a function of a different worldview. And I want to know now, and everybody who's watching you right now, Michael, of all the things you could talk about when you're here on L'chaim, is we want to hear what Michael Oren really thinks about Obama and how he thinks American Jewry should now be relating to the President of the United States.
Okay.
No one is in a better position. No one on earth, Michael, is in a better position to give us some insight into how the American Jewish community should relate to President Obama. What do you say?
Okay. Hard questions. Again, a lot of questions, Mark. Let me take them one at a time. The worldview. I'm strongly of the opinion that every president is entitled to his or her worldview, as the case may be. And this particular worldview of the Obama administration was one that put a premium on a collegial approach to the conduct of international affairs. America wasn't going to be the world's policeman anymore. We weren't going to be out front. We weren't going to be out the leader. There was only one issue in which the United States would lead, and that is the search for Israeli-Palestinian peace. Only one. A recoiling from the use of military power and projection of military power. One of the most, I think, illuminating lines that the president ever spoke was at a non-proliferation conference in 2010 where he said, quote unquote, "Whether we like it or not, America is the world's leading military superpower." Now, those are words that would never, I think, have passed the lips of John Kennedy, certainly not Ronald Reagan, not Bill Clinton. Most of us, at least in Israel, I can speak for us, we wake up in the morning and say a bracha that America is the world's leading military superpower. We think it's a good thing. But you can infer from that remark that there's an ambivalence there at best, that America is the superpower. A heavy reliance on the UN, respect for the UN bodies, even the UN Human Rights Council, which has condemned Israel more frequently than all of the countries in the world combined. Bush had withdrawn America's ambassador from that body. Obama restored it. Outreach to the Muslim world. Bush had cut off relations with Syria over the assassination of Lebanese leader Hariri. Obama restored that. Reach out to Libya. Forget the reach out to Libya. Before the United States actually tried to take down Gaddafi, the Obama administration reached out to Libya. All of these issues, to say nothing of the fact that President Obama, in his Cairo speech, for the first time, referred to Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy.
Yes.
The fact that he said the line that no country has the right to tell another country whether it should or should not possess nuclear weapons. These are monumentally important issues for Israel, and they are key elements in the president's worldview. Now, that worldview would have been problematic for any Israeli government, even a left-wing Israeli government. As it happened, there was a right-of-center Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu. Ehud Barak from the Labor Party was in that government for a long time. It was a problematic worldview. The president has said on innumerable occasions that he is pro-Israel, that he's disturbed by accusations that he is anti-Israel, that he may be anti-Semitic. But you can accuse the president of many things, but the lack of candor is not one of them. He articulates very fully his worldviews. And he has said, as recently as a speech at a Washington synagogue, which we used to attend, he said that his vision of Israel is the vision of Israel of Golda Meir, of Moshe Dayan, the ideals of Moshe Dayan, which some of us in Israel had a little cringe at, because Moshe Dayan wasn't known for his moral probity, but but it's an image of Israel that probably never existed, and certainly does not exist today. It's an idealized vision of Israel. It's not the real Israel that's inhabiting a real Middle East. It's a Middle East where that can be engaged, where rulers who talk about destroying the Jewish state and denying the Holocaust and are the world's leading sponsors of terror can be somehow mollified by engagement, in which the Palestinians, who have failed repeatedly to take advantage of offers of statehood because they lack the social cohesion, can receive Palestinian statehood tomorrow and actually have a functioning state. It's not going to fall to terrorists within a week. That is a worldview. It's a worldview that's a problem for us. However, Israel has no alternative to the United States of America as its paramount ally. I believe the United States has no alternative to Israel. And to the best of our ability that is consonant with our basic security interests, we have to accord with the views of this president, at least acknowledge that he has this different worldview. So what I can say to American Jews, understand that this is not about, from our perspective, if you want to go take either the Palestinian issue or the Iran issue, it's not about politics. It's not about partisanship. I believe that preserving bipartisan support for Israel in this country is a paramount Israeli national strategic interest. It is about, for us, for Israel, it is about life and death, period. About life and death. You want to create a Palestinian state? Create a Palestinian state tomorrow that has no national institutions, no economy, a corrupt, unelected leadership. It will survive how many days before it falls to Hamas at best, ISIS at worst? Summer of 2014, Hamas staged a coup against Mahmoud Abbas. He would have been dead. You know who saved him? We did. The IDF saved him. You want to pull the IDF out of the West Bank tomorrow? We're going to have 100,000 rockets in the West Bank, not just in southern Lebanon. For us, this is not about a nice logo on campus two-state solution. It's about life and death. On the Iranian issue, on the Iranian nuclear deal, it's not about whether this is, whether this is going to delay Iran 12, 15 years. The question is whether at the end of 12, 13 years, Iran is the same regime it is today or worse. It's not going to have one nuclear bomb. It's going to have 200 nuclear bombs because the program, the deal does not in any way delay research and development and doesn't touch on the military aspect. It doesn't address the question, here is the world's leading sponsor of terror that gives $1 billion a year to Hezbollah. What is that regime going to do with $150 billion in sanction relief? Is it going to double Hezbollah's budget? With the $1 billion, they bought 100,000 rockets. What will they do with $4 billion? These are issues for us. Are not about who wins in 2016. It's about whether our children and grandchildren have a future.
When we hear you, it's so painful. There's a party and there's a philosophy right now which says, Michael Oren, you're an alarmist and you're not a realist. And that what we have done is taken away Iran's ability to enrich enough uranium to ever have a nuclear weapon while maintaining inspection and verification processes which will let us know if Iran ever cheats. And the president has said to the American Jewish community, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon in perpetuity.
I've heard him say that, yes.
Okay, and then you come on L'chaim and you say that in 10 or 15 years, they won't have one bomb, they may have 100 bombs.
And it's not just, I want to emphasize, it's not just me saying this.
I understand.
This is something close to a national consensus in a country which has a national consensus about nothing.
So I'm asking you, you understand then why Jews who care about the well-being, the safety, and survival of the State of Israel, and when we talk about the State of Israel, Michael, we're talking about you and your wife and your children.
Precisely.
And we're talking about people. It's not an idea. The State of Israel is not an idea. It comes out of a longing and a tradition of 2,000 years, but it's real human beings here.
Yes.
Okay. And what Jews who understand that care about is your well-being. And if Iran has intercontinental ballistic missiles to put a nuclear warhead on, we're worried about our children here in the United States as well.
You should be.
Right? Okay.
Should be.
And the question becomes, then how can the Obama administration get it so wrong? And how can an American Jew feel good about a president who would put you and our grandchildren in this kind of predicament? How can we feel good about that, Michael?
Well, over many years of experience, for which this hair has grown gray, I've come to realize that whether it's on the Palestinian issue or more recently over the Iranian nuclear issue, it's not about the facts. It's about belief. It's about belief systems. Either you believe, if you believe the Palestinians tomorrow are capable of sustaining a state that is going to be cohesive and peaceful and are willing to live side by side in permanent peace with us, you believe it. And I can't assail your belief, okay? I can't dispel your belief. I can deduce all the facts in the world and it's not going to change. The same thing is true with Iranian the Iranian nuclear deal. If you believe that Rouhani, that his smile is genuine, the fact that I tell you that political executions have gone up under Rouhani's watch by 40% in the last 2 years, all right, that they're hanging gay people off of cranes in Tehran, it's not going to change your belief. He's smiling. He's real. And look, the President of the United States says Iran will never get a nuclear weapon. Maybe we're reading different agreements. According to the agreement that we are reading, the 159-page agreement, between the end of 13 to 15 years, the agreement expires. And if it's the same regime or a worse regime, and since as I said earlier, the research and development of advanced centrifuges that can enrich uranium at 20 times the current rate, and if the work on the weaponization continues, because that is not prohibited by the agreement, if that continues, then at 15 years and 1 day, this regime emerges with a capability to make not one, but a great number of weapons. Now, that is a conclusion which is shared by virtue of the entire Israeli security establishment. And starting in 2009, the Iranian regime had a dry run for the Arab Spring in the Green Revolution. And the regime learned how to deal with that revolution. It learned how to put into place a million-man security apparatus that can crush anybody who raises his head up. And there is a very good chance that in 13 to 15 years, you're going to have this regime or a worse regime. Maybe it'll change, but I'm not willing to bet or risk the lives of my grandchildren on that hope.
Right. But you do believe President Obama thinks he's right and that he is not putting Israel or American grandchildren at risk.
Yes.
Yes.
That I do.
Right. And the issue here is you just think he's wrong, that the assessments that went into whatever decisions led to this Iran nuclear agreement, they simply were wrong, faulty.
Well, I'll tell you that for nearly 5 years I participated in an intimate dialogue with our American counterparts about Iran. And we looked at the same data, and we reached the same conclusion about the nature and state and progress in the Iranian nuclear program. Where we differed was in our analysis of the Iranian regime. From the American perspective, this was a rational regime. Yes, it was nasty, and it supported terror, and wasn't very big on human rights. But at the end of the day, it operated on a cost-benefit analysis, and that it wanted to remain in power, and to remain in power, it needed to remove the sanctions and give up part of its nuclear program. It's a rational process. The Israeli position was that this is fundamentally an irrational regime. An irrational regime that sometimes took rational steps to reach irrational goals, which be, let's consult with the hidden imam about what to do, or talk about destroying the state of Israel, which is an irrational goal. The Nazis was an irrational regime that took rational steps, conquering Czechoslovakia or Poland in order to reach a rational goal. So there was a fundamental philosophical difference in the two sides, and I think that philosophical condition continues. The issue today is, okay, we have this difference. The agreement is a reality. How then can Israel best grapple with these realities, with the new dangers, the new challenges generated by this deal? How can we defend ourselves? How can we deter Iran?
There were times when you were the ambassador where you would remind the Jewish community that the Obama administration has been very good on giving military aid to Israel.
It has.
And sharing intelligence.
It has. It is.
Okay.
Except more recently on the Iranian issue.
Correct.
Yes.
And then there seemed to be a rift between, on a personal level, the president and the Israeli prime minister.
Right.
And there was this big event where the prime minister comes to the White House, and the way it's told is he gets snubbed by the president, who won't have his picture taken with the prime minister, who leaves the prime minister to go to his own private residence, and ultimately the prime minister has to leave through the back door of the White House. So now you're no longer the formal Israeli ambassador to Washington. What's the truth about that event?
The truth about that event is the way I tell it in the book. And that is, this was a meeting that was called at the last minute. It was called as a working meeting, not as a state visit. I understand there's a protocol.
Yes.
In a working meeting, you walk in, no one takes your picture. You know, there's no 4-course meal. You walk into work. We worked in the Roosevelt room, which is adjacent to the Oval Office. At certain times, the Prime Minister and the President adjourned to the Oval Office. They came back into the Roosevelt room. We were working, and we were trying to find ways to get the peace process off the shoals on which it had been stuck, probably mostly by the settlement and Jerusalem issue. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the President said he wanted to go upstairs and have dinner. His wife and children were not in town at the time. And we asked to stay. The Prime Minister asked to stay in the Roosevelt and keep working. We kept working. At 11:30, we reached a certain juncture, at which point the Prime Minister asked if the President could come back down from his residence. The residence right above. The President came back down. We sat for another hour with him, worked. Then the President went back to bed, and we stayed in the White House to about 2:30, 3:30 in the morning. I got out the next morning and found out that we'd been snubbed. Now,
which you did not feel at the time.
We did not feel at the time. So the question then remained, and I don't have the answer to this day, who put out the spin that we were subbed? Now, it could have been a Democrat. Some people in the Democratic Party who didn't like us. It could be some people in the Republican Party who don't like Obama. At this point in our relationship, Obama is not particularly popular in the state of Israel. It could have been an Israeli source. I don't know who put it out. All I know is 2 hours later, when the morning papers come running off, we've been snubbed. And
it has mythic proportions now.
I know, and to this day, I will tell you, I was in all of that meeting, and at no point did I felt that we had been snubbed.
Nor did the Prime Minister.
No.
Isn't it so? It's a tragic aspect of contemporary America-Israeli history.
Yes.
That this is the way in which it casts a pall over the Obama-Netanyahu relationship. And I assume there is some tension there. Yes, Michael?
Yes, but what's interesting, I think, is we're sort of missing the big picture here, Mark, is that it wasn't who was responsible for the story or the spin about the snub. It was that a story like that was already possible and believable at that point.
Yes. What's it mean?
It meant that everyone understood that the relationship was in a different place and that a snub was possible. I mean, such an event would not have happened. It would be very difficult to imagine that type of spin making the front pages during the Bush years, during the Clinton years. It would have been very difficult during the Reagan years. There wasn't an ideal relationship between George Bush Sr., 41, and Yitzhak Shamir, but even then I think it would have been difficult to imagine a situation like that. My point is, by 2010, already the tenor of that relationship, the atmosphere had changed in such a way that spin could be spun.
Very interesting. Are you worried for the relationship between the American administration and the State of Israel? And for that matter, again, when you were an American, you leaned, you were a typical liberal kid, liberal Jew. And there was
I think it was a centrist, but okay.
Well,
I was always a centrist.
Did your parents vote Democratic?
Yes.
Okay. And would you have said at the time when you were growing up and you were a young kid and you were at Columbia, would you have leaned towards the Democratic Party?
Yes.
Okay. Are you concerned that there is a new Democratic Party that has gone so far to the left and feels so much sympathy and empathy for the Palestinian cause that at a Democratic National Convention they can boo the notion of putting back into the Democratic platform some statement about Jerusalem? Are you worried that the Democratic Party didn't want to support the Israeli position when it came to the Iran nuclear deal? At the moment, you and I are both committed to the notion that Israel should be a bipartisan issue. At the same time, do you worry that there's an erosion within the Democratic Party of support for the State of Israel?
I think you know my answers to all those questions. It's yes, and I'm concerned. It's a wing of the Democratic Party. It's the people who booed at the convention in 2012. And I think that Israel should be aware of this to a greater degree. In Knesset, I'm always raising this issue, and that we should be investing heavily in convincing that part of the Democratic Party that we are a liberal democracy.
Yes.
Here's a story I always tell about, in the Knesset, we don't have caucuses for many reasons. One of them is that the word for caucus in Hebrew means coconut, so you can't go to a caucus. But we do have lobbies, and we have committees. And recently, I went to a committee meeting that was multi-partisan. There were Jews, Arabs, right-wingers, left-wingers, and there were 60 to 70 high school students who were transgender. And the issue was, how can Israel sensitize high school students to the challenges of transgenderism? Now, I'm sitting in this discussion, and it was packed. The room was packed, wall to wall, thinking that there were two extraordinary things about this moment. One, that this is happening about a 2-hour drive from ISIS. This discussion about sensitizing high school kids to transgenderism. Secondly, the second most extraordinary thing is that I'm the only one in the room who thinks this is extraordinary. I'm the only one thinking, wow, this is happening, 2 hours drive from ISIS. And I had this fantasy that we should get 3 busloads of progressive Democrats and bring them into this room and saying, Israel's not just settlements, Israel's not just Palestine, this is Israel too. Look at us.
What should the Jewish perspective be in terms of support for Israel and the Iranian deal?
Right now, help Israel to defend itself against these challenges that have been generated by this deal. Help Israel deter Iran. That's what we need right now. Understand that Israel wants to negotiate with the Palestinians on the basis of the two-state formula, but the United States has a role in getting the Palestinians back to the negotiating table and preventing them from declaring their state unilaterally, from going to the International Criminal Court and getting us sanctioned as a war criminal state. All of those issues are grave threats to the state of Israel. Stand with us on this. We can disagree about many things. We can disagree about whether this settlement should go here or there, or Jews should build in this part of Jerusalem or that part of Jerusalem, but understand that the threats we face are genuine, unprecedented, and in many cases existential. Stick with us.
You are beyond fabulous.
Thank you.
You have written an extraordinary book. You must get this book. It's well written, it's beautifully written, and there's so much information here that is gripping. But more important, what you've done for the Jewish world is Yotzei min haklal. And I am so grateful for this time. Kol tuva hatzlacha in all you do, and I hope there are other times you come back and sit with me. You're wonderful. Thank you. Ambassador Michael Oren, who's made an invaluable contribution to the state of Israel, the Jewish people, and whose latest book is Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide, published by Random House. Do yourself a favor. It's a very important book. It's the book of the Jewish year, but it'll become a classic. As long as you're concerned about the state of Israel, you'll be reading Ally. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me. Any thoughts or comments you may have to anything you heard Michael Oren say on this edition of L'Chaim, please email me, write me, post it on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And if you want to be in touch with Michael Oren, you can email me, and I'll pass your emails on to him. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to JEM, to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.